absolutely cannot thank Ken Johnson of Deadman Ink Productions enough for requesting that I do a review of the animated movie Batman: Mask of the Phantasm. I don't know how he possibly could have known, but this movie is actually my absolute favorite Batman movie, animated or not. I know that calling it the best Batman movie is a really, really tall order, but surely if you've seen the movie you can see how I would at least suggest that it's perhaps one of the greatest full-length animated superhero features to have been released up to this point in time. And no, I'm not going to take that back. Likely not ever. It's going to take a lot to knock that out of my top slot. Feel free to disagree, of course. I mean, I don't typically openly cosplay as comic-related characters, and yet I did it just once, and it was a Phantasm from Batman: Mask of the Phantasm. And yet this film somehow manages to find its way falling through cracks in the general public's circle of knowledge pretty frequently. I mean, it's not a completely unknown movie, and it had amazingly high praise from just about anyone who's ever come across it, and yet it still seems sorely underrepresented. The least I can do is give it a little bit of representation myself. This movie was animated by Warner Brothers Animation in December of 1993. I was 7, nearly 8 when it hit theaters, though I'd never see it in theaters, and instead saw it as soon as it hit video rental in early 1994. Those big old clamshell cases came bundled with this cool comic adaptation of the movie inside the case. Man, I wish I still had a copy of that somewhere. Realize as I talk about this movie, I've only read a select handful of physical Batman comics. A lot of my Batman knowledge comes from animated series and features, as well as live-action movies. I just wanted to be upfront and not misrepresent myself, of course. I'd love to sit down with some more comics, like The Killing Joke. Now that's a favorite of mine. Perhaps I'll soon have enough time and money to finally do so. But comparatively, I'd really been enjoying Batman the Animated Series, a creation out of the now legendary mind of animator Bruce Timm. The series, along with Superman the Animated Series, would go on to create its own fantastic legends and lore and set the expectations for how the Warner Brothers animated universe would look for the next 25 years, with likely more to come in the future. Even Teen Titans Go, for as cartoony and rubbery as it is, still has tons of Bruce Timm features and body shapes to the characters. Mask of the Phantasm, of course, resides in this Bruce Timm created universe of Batman the Animated Series. You could probably pretty safely put it behind the events somewhere around Batman Year One. Which, while I'm thinking about it, I've heard the animated adaptation of Year One is relatively accurate to the original comic adaptation, so I think that having seen it, I should be relatively up to speed. You can perhaps even see now, if you watch Year One and then watch Mask of the Phantasm, that elements of the Year One comic may in fact have directly influenced the creation of Mask of the Phantasm. Bruce Wayne has clearly been Batman for at least a little while. The city of Gotham still can't decide whether he's good or bad. Commissioner Jim Gordon seems to have learned to trust him already. There's currently no Robin, and although the Joker exists, it seems he's not relying on assistance from Harley Quinn, who was of course created specifically for the animated Batman universe. To speak first about the animation of this film would probably be for the best. It is, in a word, gorgeous. Many later DC animated movies would go on to look a lot like it, but this simply takes the cake. Everything was still being drawn on hand-painted cells at the time, and it shows. There's a grit that comes with hand-drawn and painted animation, and it absolutely perfectly matches the tone of Batman and this movie on the whole. The cinematography is beautiful, although perhaps cinematography is a strange choice of words when describing a piece of animation. The choice of imaginary camera placement, where the camera pans, where it draws your eyes, is all so creative and perfect and absolutely suits this story. You can clearly see how different kinds of styles of work were integrated into the creation of the movie. Perhaps the opening credits sequence is a bit difficult to stomach now, over 20 years later, but you can see the heart in the early CG, and its lighting and coloring do in fact match the tone of the rest of the movie. You can see the extreme detail in certain cells where the intention was for them to either be a background set piece or otherwise was not intended to move. Certain moments with the leading female role, Andrea Beaumont, use very traditional Hollywood romantic lighting elements to highlight the classic Hollywood beauty in her eyes, and it makes it feel like a real, mature Hollywood film, whether it's a piece of animation or not. The music, of course, sounds much like the TV series, using adaptations of the Danny Elfman theme from the 1989 Batman film. The entire soundtrack is fully orchestrated with so much atmosphere dripping from it. The choral chanting in the opening sequence alone is enough to give you goosebumps. The movie starts just the way it should, with Batman busting up an illegal counterfeit money scam from the mob. The action is solid here, as are most of the movie's action sequences. But what Batman couldn't have predicted was that there was somebody else out to stop the head mobster in this organization. Although we never hear this person's street name in the movie, it can be pretty easily assumed that this person is our Phantasm. The character is super intimidating with a very death-like appearance, cloak and hood, a mask that's somewhere between a skull and a hockey mask, and an enormous blade in the right arm. The Phantasm appears and disappears at will through large, thick puffs of smoke, and masks their voice with what obviously seems to be a deep voice changer.
Your angel of death awaits.
When the mobster, Chucky Saul, is led to drive his car off the side of a parking garage and into the windows of the building across the street, Batman is the one who's unintentionally seen and therefore gets a bad rep with the people of Gotham, including Councilman Arthur Reeves.
I'm telling you, friends, it's vigilantism at its deadliest. How many times are we gonna let Batman cross the line?
Of course, by this point in Batman's career, however long that's actually been, Commissioner Gordon doesn't buy that Batman's the mob killer, since he has a history of not killing people, so at least he has that going for him. The movie, I believe, does a great job of depicting who Bruce Wayne actually is, not just Batman. We see him mingling with multiple women at a party, one of which freaks out at just how much of a player he proves himself to be. By the way, one of those little ladies is totally also the voice of Harley Quinn in the TV show. No wonder Harley doesn't appear in this movie.
What about the I word?
The I word?
Engagement.
But all the party does is bring Bruce to remember the one that got away, Andrea Beaumont, voiced by Dana Delaney. I might imagine that she really can't come back to voice the character again, since she would soon take on the role of Lois Lane in the animated Superman series, and keep that role for quite some time. So, to be two nearly identical voices in the same DC animated universe at the same time probably wasn't gonna work. In any case, there are fairly large hunks of the movie that are told in these flashbacks. They're all pretty well timed to perfectly get a sense of what exactly it is the audience needs to know about the story at just the right moment. It's not perfectly clear just how far back these flashbacks go, but one could assume that it's within the last 10 years, as it's before Bruce becomes Batman, or even has the idea or the full training to be Batman at all. It's while visiting his parents' graves that he also meets Andrea, who also lost her mother. They only kinda sorta hit it off, but this is when Bruce is shaken out of his memories to return to his party. At the same time, another mobster by the name of Buzz Bronski is visiting the grave of the already dead Chucky Saul. This now marks the second appearance of the Phantasm, who then kills Bronski by allowing him to stumble into a grave and pushing a large angel gravestone statue on top of him, which we can only assume crushes him to death, especially by the reaction on two other mobsters' faces.
Oh, man.
Soon Batman learns that Andrea Beaumont is back in town, having apparently been gone for who knows how long. This, of course, is reopening many wounds for both of them. Andrea has no plans to meet up with Bruce and actually instead begins seeing the councilman, either because they'd known each other for years or because she was legitimately trying to forget about Bruce. Their dinner sequence together is one of full, deep pangs, even for the viewer, as Batman seemingly creepily watches their dinner through a pair of binoculars, then flashes back to happy memories, going on dates, and visiting places like the Gotham World Fair. Of course, many of Bruce's happy memories, including this one, are tinged with other less than thrilling memories involving his early crime fighting, which he really sucked at the time. It's something that would begin to drive a wedge between Andrea and Bruce, despite how much they truly loved one another.
Thank God you're all right. I was so frightened. Come on, let me have a look at you.
Andrea, please.
And how true is something like that? I mean, even if we're not talking about crime fighting, something extreme like that, there are those relationships where you're just truly drawn to one another, very passionately and very feverishly, but there's some other sort of external force in your lives that forces you to be drawn apart from one another. Bruce remembers that Andrea's father had mob ties. Back when he was meeting her dad, occasionally mob bosses like Sal Valestra would come into his office and simply muscle his way into business. This prompts Batman to show up at Andrea's apartment later that night and interrogate her on the subject. She knows exactly who Batman is, of course, and Bruce doesn't even bother trying to hide it. Andrea isn't thrilled that she's being interrogated, and in fact seems to put on an act like she doesn't have any love for him in that moment at all. Though I think the fact that Bruce trusts her with the knowledge that he's Batman and that Andrea would likely never go and tell anybody would suggest that they still have feelings for another that they're choosing not to act upon. Andrea leads Bruce to believe that, of course, her dad came back into town because the mob ruined her family's life and she followed. Bruce jumps to the conclusion that this means that the Phantasm that's been killing mobsters has been Mr. Beaumont this whole time. And when Batman finally leaves, Andrea finally breaks down and cries due to a large amount of emotional stress and likely having to hide how she actually continues to feel about Bruce. After all, the truth is, Bruce had actually asked Andrea to marry him. And that same day was the last day the two of them had seen each other, as Sal Balestra was finally shaking Andrea's dad down for money, and all he could think to do was have the family pack their bags and leave the country to save their lives. She'd previously never told Bruce why it was she left, simply leaving the engagement ring behind. Imagine being ghosted like that. Like, you've just been told that your relationship is over, and you don't even get the common courtesy to be told why it is your relationship has ended. You don't know what you did wrong, and you don't know how to fix it in the future, and you don't even get the chance to try to fix it now. Even knowing that it's not your fault could be immensely helpful, and all Bruce gets are a few words stating,
Need time. Forget about me.
Now realize this is the final tipping point where it portrays Bruce as becoming Batman. And his emotional stability is at an all-time low. Earlier in the movie, Bruce is having a completely insane conversation with his dead parents about whether or not to pursue vengeance. All this time, before Andrea, all he wanted to do was clean up Gotham for the sake of the injustices that robbed him of his own family. But having met Andrea, this was the one moment in his life that he thought he could actually be happy. But he's convinced that if he chooses to lead a full, happy, normal life, he'll be letting his parents down. Do you see how painfully beautiful this torment is? I mean, not that it's beautiful that somebody's being tormented, but that you can actually see just how broken a person Bruce Wayne actually is. It's more than just, "Aw, yeah, Batman is so cool." His internal turmoil is ripping him apart, and that's why I think this movie gives one of the most beautiful portrayals of Bruce Wayne. But it's in the same moment that Andrea shows up to encourage him to choose happiness.
Maybe they sent me.
She said the exact words he needed to hear, and with that, Bruce's heart might have finally been at ease. And maybe he would have found other ways to deal with his mild insanity and depression. But when the one person who might have actually helped Bruce begin to heal age-old wounds leaves your life, you can see how he no longer has any reason to hope for happiness. His one thread of sanity finally broke, and as he puts on the Batman mantle for the first time, and you see Alfred's fearful reaction to what Bruce becomes, you truly get a sense for just how lost poor Bruce's soul actually is. It's horrifically sad, and for that same reason, painfully beautiful. But meanwhile, Valestra is an old, terrified man because his old mobster friends are out there getting killed by who he assumes is Batman. So he goes to the one other person whom he assumes will care about the situation, hanging out at the now decrepit Gotham World Fair, the Joker himself, of course voiced by the illustrious Mark Hamill. Why does Valestra seemed to think that the Joker would care about mobsters getting killed. Realize the animated series came fresh off the heels of the 1989 Batman film, in which the Joker was portrayed as being a former mobster. Thus, the animated series and this movie follow similar suit. Still, despite the Joker's disbelief that Batman is the one running around and killing people, he agrees to help Sal out in finding the mob killer and killing them before they can kill anybody else. Joker personally believes that the councilman might actually have been the killer, as he might have reasons for wanting to, since he'd frequently worked on fudging paperwork for the mob in the past, though the Joker soon learns from enough conversation that it's not him. Instead, he just laughing gasses him.
Councilman, please!
Batman then comes in asking the councilman about his mob ties, which is when he tells the Bat that since he was broke and borrowing money from the mob, he ended up telling Zal exactly where Andrea and his father had run off 2 years ago to save his own skin. So even back then, that family wasn't safe. This is where all the confusing parts of the movie finally start to come together. Rather than saving Sal, Joker kills him himself and uses the body as a time bomb with a camera in it. And when the Phantasm shows up to kill Sal, Phantasm finds he's already dead, and Joker learns that the killer definitely isn't Batman. Phantasm manages to escape, but now knows to go after the Joker. Meanwhile, Batman has pieced together that one of the mobsters this whole time was the Joker, and the whole thing ends up right where the Joker has been hiding, at the derelict Gotham World Fair. In a final flashback sequence, we see that, indeed, the mob had one day finally tracked the Beaumonts all the way to Europe, and one day when Andrea came home, she found her father dead. And when we cut back to the present, we see Andrea is actually the one putting on the Phantasm garb. Meaning, of course, her father never did come back to Gotham, and instead she came back by herself with every intention on killing every member of the mob who ruined her life, both with her father and any future with the man she was falling in love with. Joker, too, has finally pieced the whole thing together before Batman ever shows up. The movie ends on a nice, long, fantastically animated fight and action sequence, with Bruce realizing Phantasm is Andrea, figuring out her father never came back, being mad at her, and all at the same time trying to stop the Joker from being an all-around jerk.
You're too late, Batman! There are 20 miles of tunnels under this place, and they're all filled with high explosives. In 5 minutes, everything goes up.
There's incredible danger and peril, and even a little bit of blood, so you know things just got serious. By the end of it, Bruce only has a few words left for Andrea.
What will vengeance solve?
If anyone knows the answer to that, Bruce, it's you.
Leave, Andy. Now.
Please.
We see a horribly pained loss of the love of Bruce's life for the second time. It's so gut-wrenching, because we know that Bruce and Andrea are two sides of the exact same coin. All things considered, they suffered roughly the same losses, and very nearly handled their reactions to the losses in the exact same way. But walking the line between doing the right thing and getting revenge is a very fine line, and that one tiny difference between these two people heartbreakingly ruins Bruce's capability of continuing a relationship with someone who was otherwise so very perfect for him, and as far as I understand, someone he will never even remotely come close to being able to recreate in a relationship setting ever again.
Goodbye, my love.
Wait, did she just say that directly in front of the Joker? Well, he probably knows now through context clues that Batman is Bruce Wayne. Good job, Andrea. It's pretty ambiguous whether or not she takes him and kills him, but, well, he keeps showing up in the animated series, so I guess she must have let him go. Then why would she? Well, perhaps Bruce's words really got through to her. Maybe she was touched enough by them. The movie ends with Andrea just trying to be alone on a boat, leaving Gotham. Very, very sad. And Bruce is also desperately missing Andrea, but knowing he still has to get out there and do his job as Batman. And again I say, what a fantastic movie. The atmosphere is amazing, the pacing is well done, and it paints Bruce in such a fantastic light, and you can really get a sense of why it is he's being Batman at all. You find yourself truly pained for his losses, not just prattling off, Batman's parents are dead, as a fact with no weight to it. And Andrea's characterization is a completely understandable portrayal, in a way creating the idea of, what if Bruce's situation drove him to seek revenge rather than prevention of a similar pain? The movie is so good because you likely came into it for Batman, the Joker, and this hardcore-looking mysterious villain, but in the end you got a completely believable romance, more believable than any other one I've seen Bruce thrown into in any other animated piece or Hollywood movie. The movie is a cartoon based on an animated TV series, so all the parents, of course, took their kids to see it, but you find that a lot of the subject matter is adult enough to intrigue even adults. Hell, you don't need to show anything gratuitous, but it doesn't take a lot to figure out that one night Andrea rescues Bruce from the cops who have wrongly been chasing him, returns him safely home, starts making out with him, and with the camera panning away from them, it pans back to them the next morning with Andrea wearing Bruce's shirt, and you just know they banged! To slip that into a children's movie is pretty crafty. Oh, also, can I talk about the ending credits song for a moment? Heartbreakingly gorgeous, and perfectly written for the sake of the characters in the movie. Maybe you can even argue that the singer would be singing from the perspective of Andrea. Oh, and who would have guessed that the vocalist is Tia Carrere, the love interest from the Wayne's World movies? All in all, if you've never seen this movie, you've done yourself a great disservice. I'd almost argue you don't even need to know a lot about Batman in order to understand this well, self-contained story. It's truly a shame that DC Animation has never returned to theatrical, animated comic book hero movies, because despite how good many direct-to-video animated movies have been, I'm confident that they could totally kill it again if they returned to form, such as in this movie. Again, I have to simply reiterate, this is my personal favorite Batman movie, animated or not. Go find it on DVD immediately.
You think you know everything about me, don't you?
I dive at your bottom. I bloody well ought to, sir.
Well, you're wrong.